Dr. Robert Flannery is founder and CEO of Dr. Rob Farms, providing medical cannabis to over 70 dispensaries. Prior to Dr. Rob's farm, he was production manager for Spark, one of the Bay Area's largest and most trusted sources of high-quality cannabis. Dr. Rob is a graduate of UC Davis and received his Ph.D. in environmental horticulture from UC Davis Plant Biology program, with an emphasis on cut flower production in controlled environments. Dr. Rob co-chairs the Agriculture Committee of the California Cannabis Industry Association and is going to talk to us today about modern cannabis production systems.
Thank you, very much appreciate it, and sincere honor to be asked to come and speak in front of you guys today. So we're all grad students here. Nice, very cool. No, we got a couple coming in and out, that's fine. I was literally in your guys' shoes not too long ago. So it's always fun to come back to the alma mater and talk to you guys about something I happen to be passionate about. You know, I actually didn't use cannabis in college at all. As you might tell, I played football here. And, NC2A, THC is a banned substance, so I wanted to play football. I never used it. And then I got into grad school here, and like, okay, well, and I bought into the whole, cannabis makes you stupid type of thinking. And I'm like, well, I got to work on my PhD. I can't be using cannabis. But it wasn't until actually I had back surgery because of football a handful of years ago that I used it. And I was like, okay, this works very, very well. So, but today, I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit about the history of cannabis cultivation in the state of California. We're going to be talking about what has been going on, what currently is going on, and then we're going to finish off today's lecture with a little bit of science. So it's mostly story time today. Lots of photos. You're all going to learn how to grow cannabis, and I will be hiring you later on for a job to grow for me. Once again, my chief marketing officer put this together. This portion of it, I did the content, but he always wants me to talk about myself as well, which I don't really have a problem doing. But one thing I did want to talk about for this particular slide is my background at Spark, being a production director there. Come to find out, I was the first PhD in the United States working in commercial cannabis production. Which is a very unique position. It's not a 1 in a million thing, it's a 1 in 330 million thing. And became a very leverageable and marketable position. People started finding out that there's a nerd in the industry, and they started asking me to come and consult with them. And basically very quickly found out that cannabis cultivation is kind of behind the times when it comes to typical horticultural practices. And I would go to these grows and I'd see people using compounds on the plants that were turning that medicine to poison. One of them being myclobutanol, which is a systemic fungicide that when you heat it up releases hydrogen cyanide. So that's typically frowned upon to consume hydrogen cyanide, especially because when you consume cannabis, you have to heat it up. And this is systemic, so it's in the plant. It's not sprayed on the plant, it's in the plant. And it wasn't until my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. Actually, my brother's here today too, so the twin right here. So our mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I remember very distinctly this phone call because I was in the dry cure space at Spark, literally surrounded by a ton of cannabis. And so she's currently cancer-free, just a FYI, so she's doing good. But she had triple negative breast cancer. She went through chemo and radiation and 2 rounds of surgery. And it was at that time that I said, well, Mom, I can give you access to cannabis. And she's like, okay, that's great. Well, I don't want to smoke and I don't want to vape it. I want to eat it. And everything I had grown that I knew was clean was meant for smokable and vapable. And so here I'm thinking, I just was going to a bunch of farms, talking to people, seeing that they're putting these poisons on these plants. And I'm thinking to myself, am I about to poison my mom? I'm going to have to source some product, and I don't want to poison my mom. And that was really the birth of Doc Rob Farms and what I'm doing today, is because I knew there were going to be people like my mom out there that don't want to be consuming these types of products. Paclobutrazol, which is a plant growth regulator, is heavily used in the industry, is a suspected mutagen. These are things that we don't want to be using. There's a lot of mythology behind this particular plant, and it still persists even on campus here at Davis, where this is a science-driven campus, and there's still some mythology. But I do want to show a quick little video of cannabis and what it can do to you. So let's go ahead and get started there.
Of course, if you're safe.
It's very accurate, by the way. This is what happens.
In the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity. See this important film now, before it is too late.
All right, so this is actually a real movie, by the way. This is a trailer for Reefer Madness. It was originally called Tell Your Children. This was produced by a church group that they wanted to talk about how evil cannabis is. And I'm here to tell you that it's a fairly benign plant. But now that we are all aware of the dangers of cannabis and that we should all go home and tell your children and family members to avoid it, we now know why also it became illegal. And the illegality of cannabis is part of the reason why historically cannabis has been grown in California the way it has. And so that's what I'm here to really actually talk about. You guys have heard of the Emerald Triangle before? So the Emerald Triangle is literally just these three counties up here: Mendocino County, Humboldt County, and Trinity County. And this is where historically majority of cannabis has been produced in California. And this has been primarily outdoor production, but there's a reason why people historically have grown there. Does anyone kind of have a guess? Is it a great place to grow cannabis? Why is it grown there? There you go. And you can see right here, this is where the populations are in California, right? I don't see any red up in those counties. Fort Bragg is like the largest city in Humboldt, and that's about it. I think Eureka might be bigger, but so historically cannabis has been cultivated in these three counties, and it's just because it's so isolated. There's actually a picture from a part of Mendocino called Spy Rock. So you can see that it's basically forest. This butts up against the Mendocino National Forest as well. So there's a lot of forest out here. It's very secluded. It's very difficult to get to. In fact, the only way to get through to this location is by one road. And it's a dirt road, and it's kind of interesting. I've done some consulting up here, and there's about 70 farmers up this one road. And one of them has been growing there since 1978. In fact, he even told me, he's like, I'm out of the game at post-legalization. He's like, I've got $500,000 buried in my backyard. I'm going to use that to buy a house in Fort Bragg and retire. Good for you, buddy. But this is a place called Spy Rock, and literally the farm at the base of that mountain, it's very, very much old-timey, it's kind of like Hatfield and McCoy type of mentality. If there is something up on the mountain that goes wrong, a huge air horn is blasted, and the farmer at the bottom pulls his semi in front of the road to block it, and no one's allowed to come on or off the mountain until that dispute is taken care of. It is old school thinking, but I did meet someone who was born on the mountain, and literally the umbilical cord was cut with pruning shears. So, there are a lot of people that grew up in this environment, and because of that, they actually created the Spy Rock School. This is to educate their children. This was built by cannabis growers, and so this is it's a very unique culture up there. And this is historically how it's been grown since basically the 20s in California. This is a farm. It's also in Mendocino County. It's a licensed farm out in Covelo area. Very small population. However, this is up in the foothills. Way back there is actually the National Forest. You can see towards the back of that picture. This is historically how cannabis has been grown. In Mendocino County, you could only have 25 plants at any given time, for the most part. This is now since changed. So, Mendocino County allowed for this to happen. They said you can have 25 plants, So that meant that people were going to grow huge monster trees. I'm going to get as much yield off of each plant because I'm limited by the number of plants I can go. So this has affected how we grew cannabis. You can see that, so this is not the same farm from the bottom side, and their plants are a little bit more mature. These are big plants. Each one of these plants is going to produce about 8 pounds of product, okay? Now they can probably sell this. Back in the heyday, they're selling this at $6,000 a pound. Nowadays, you're selling outdoor product for around 800 maybe. But there, you can see why historically people wanted to grow this product if you're growing it at $6,000 a pound. It's still profitable at 800, but you just need to be a little bit more efficient. So this is a picture, right, this is probably about a week before the harvest, or it's actually a video, sorry. But this is at the top of that farm. Like, that picture's really moving. Yeah. You guys are all really high right now, you're just hallucinating. Actually, cannabis does not cause hallucinations, just euphoria. And this is a picture of me, my handsome mug in those plants. You can see how big these plants are. These are typically 200 to 300 gallon pots that they're growing in. It takes a lot of material, but this is only harvested one time a year, right? So, and honestly, we just finished harvest. One thing's interesting, historically, this doesn't really happen as much anymore. If you're driving south on 101 in Mendocino County, you'll see a line of white vans driving south to San Francisco. And typically, CHP in Mendocino County just escorts them out of the county. Like, just get it out of here, we don't want it. And all it is just the product being transported into the city. So that usually is happening right about now. But so outdoor cultivation is all about big plants. We are seeing more people transitioning to light deprivation. This is a photoperiodic plant, which means that they need 12 hours of dark in order to trigger flowering, otherwise they'll stay in a vegetative state. So basically, we see these big plants. We do see some people doing hoop houses outdoor now, do some light deprivation, maybe get 2, maybe 3 harvests a year, but this is typically how it's been grown historically in California. Now, there's also indoor cultivation. This is actually my time at Spark. You can see a little Spark symbol right here. These people are actually famous in the cannabis industry. I don't know if you're familiar with the strain hunters, but we're walking down the streets of San Francisco. Maybe this says something about San Francisco more than how famous they are, but people are stopping them to get their autographs. The strain hunters are a group out of the Netherlands, and they go find genetics for cannabis all over the world. And they actually said, so Franco, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he said the best cannabis on the planet is found in Northern California. He's like, you guys are decades ahead of everyone else. And he's like, I don't know if it's an Epicurean lifestyle that you typically see in Northern California or what, but it's just the best around. And of course, he was also very medicated when he did say this, but he said, my product was top 10 he's ever smoked, so I'll take that as a win. But this is, the reason why I'm talking about this is a transition into indoor. So moving that product from the secluded areas of California to the cities and the urban centers where people are mostly consuming the product is risky. And so people started saying, well, let's grow this indoors in the urban centers so we don't have to worry about transporting it. So this is still done quite a bit in the state. It is the smallest portion of cannabis cultivation. However, it is quite prominent. And one thing I did want to point out here is the way that cannabis is growing. That cannabis is significantly smaller than the huge monster trees you find out in the forests of Mendocino County and Humboldt County. Also want to point out, look at all that venting up top. So these are 1,000-watt HPS lamps. Each one of those is individually vented and cooled. I remember when I was in grad school here, anytime there was a bust up in Humboldt, the police would donate all this equipment to the Hort department. And so we had water-cooled, like HPS. HPS is high-pressure sodium. It's a high-intensity discharge lamp. These water-cooled systems. It was awesome. It's amazing. Like, you could actually touch it. Like, you cannot touch that. It will burn yourself. So it gets really hot in there. So that's a problem, though. I mean, growing outdoors, the sun is free, and you're never going to get as good a quality of light as the sun. But if you want to do this because it's illegal and you want to do it close to an urban center, you kind of have to make these compromises. Now, in the state of California, indoor grown product sells at a higher premium. It typically, we're right now seeing it selling from anywhere from $1,800 to $2,200 a pound. I know one guy who actually sells his indoor product for $3,500 a pound. So it definitely, the costs of goods sold are higher. but the price for it also is higher as well. This is kind of, I just want to show this picture because it kind of shows you that yellowish tinge of that high pressure sodium. Those with the lamps actually kind of, this is what they look like. And so it produces a lot of infrared as well. Infrared heats up those plants. And so there's a lot of cooling that has to go along with it. Here's a picture from one of our old facilities. And this guy right here is actually one of my employees. He's a great guy. He's one of the best growers I know. But this is under metal halides. It's another type of discharge lamp. It's a little bit bluer in color, which affects the plants a little bit more. So, I mean, you guys are plant nerds too. What do you think the blue light does to the plant?
It's vegetative growth.
What's that?
It's used during the veg cycle, right?
Yeah, typically used in veg cycle. It does also have an effect on elongation of the stems too. And so so you see these different effects from having used different types of lights. And there are certain cultivars. People use the term strains, and sometimes I'm guilty of it too, but strain is actually a term used for bacteria. Cultivar or cultivated variety is the proper term. So some of these cultivars do better under metal halides. Some of them do better under HPS. And I would argue that almost all of them would do best under the sun. But there's a lot of equipment that's required to build an indoor facility. I mean, this is just the light reflector. So that HID bulb is inside this, and it just reflects light down. These are the things that are vented. You can see the venting towards the top right there. They're sealed with glass underneath, and these are kept separate from the plants themselves. These will scorch those plants if you get them too close. And if they were open, you have a greater chance of doing that. Typically, the rule of thumb is it's about tip of your elbow to your fingers. That's how far the HPS needs to be away from the top of your canopy. Otherwise, you're going to have some trouble. Now, people also get into LEDs. There's actually some research I was doing at Dark Heart Nursery down in Oakland. And so LEDs are of significant interest as well, because typically you see about a 60% use of energy, and you get the same amount of photosynthetically active radiation. That's great. I think that's fantastic. I love the direction this is going in. However, there is something to be said about full spectrum light. There's more than just one or two photoreceptors in those plants. We all know about P680 and P700, and that's why these are red and it looks purplish pink, but that's because red and blue light. That's what's driving that photosynthesis. But there's something to be said about full spectrum as well, and that's some of the research that I'm very interested in doing. It looks really pretty though. This is what they're still in veg here, but this is what they kind of look like. The plants aren't actually pink. That's just the light because it's so intense. This is more of what they look like. And you kind of get a comparison right here to see what those different lights look like. And the reason why I'm talking about all these things is, this is historically how people have grown. In indoor, it requires a significant amount of energy. And you can see that because of things like this. This is not one of ours. I actually stole this from the internet and didn't cite it properly. But this is some of the units that we use for cooling and dehumidification. And so for one of our larger facilities we had in San Francisco, we had about 4 of these that were at any given time working full bore just to keep the rooms cool. So it's pretty intense. Nowadays, we're seeing more and more cannabis cultivation happening in greenhouse. And I'm a big fan of this. And part of the reason why that is cannabis is nothing more than cut flower floriculture. This is just another plant. I could be growing Gerber daisies in here. Okay, this is just another recipe in my cookbook. Now I know how to grow cannabis. Now I grow Gerber daisy, I grow chrysanthemum. And if you look at where the majority of cut flower floriculture occurs, or floriculture in general in California, it's almost all done in greenhouse. And there's a reason for that. And I think more and more cannabis cultivators in the industry are starting to understand that, and they're drifting towards that. And I've been saying this from the get-go. But this is a fun little picture. We can see this is early on in flower. You can see that we have some trellising going on. Cannabis itself, it can be very floppy. It is a weed. It does grow like a weed. But to get really high quality product, it does require a tremendous amount of labor. This kind of goes to show you what, on a very large scale, what was really required. So this is a cultivar called Blue Cookies. And it's basically a cross between a cultivar called Blueberry and Girl Scout cookies. Girl Scout cookies was made famous not too long ago, probably in the late 90s, early thousands, but it became even more famous probably in the late, like 2008, 2009. There's a local rapper in the Bay Area called Burner who talked about Girl Scout cookie and made it very famous, and that's where it is today. So in greenhouse production, here we have these plants grown hydroponically. This is hydroponic production. This is grown in coconut coir. So this is soilless culture. Once again, you can see the glazing on the greenhouse. You can see all the horizontal airflow fans. One of the goals of horticulture is uniformity. You want to have a uniform crop. If I'm going to go and buy Doc Rob Farms pre-rolls, which I encourage you all to do, available in Sacramento, and actually delivery service in Davis pretty soon. Sorry. You want the same product over and over again, right? And so if I'm growing outdoor, maybe it's a little bit, it's a cloudy year, it's a rainy year, it's a cold year. There's going to be some changes in the environment that are going to affect the outcome of that product. Now in indoor, you have a very uniform environment, but it costs a lot of money to do it. Greenhouse is the best of both worlds, and I'm actually going to make an argument towards the end of my talk today that there's actually a better way even beyond greenhouse to go, and I call it hybrid indoor. But once again, you can see there's a lot of work to maintain this crop.
So structurally, these plants, you're just letting that single apical dominance happen with the cola, single large cola versus manipulating it over?
It depends on the style of production that we want to get into. This particular one was topped once. And so when it's still in the veg cycle, you pinch when it's around 12 inches tall to get to release that apical dominance. We do the same thing in rose production to basically get those axillary buds to break. And once again, the reason why it's called bud, because these are flowers, right? Female flowers too. This is a dioecious plant. And so, we have both male and female plants. And so this particular one was basically, we broke the apical dominance in veg one time. Yeah. Now, how to grow cannabis. Now, I want you guys to take a lot of notes here because I want to hire you eventually. But at the same time, part of why I want to talk about this is because it's not just you throw some seeds in the ditch and, you get a bunch of weed later on and, everyone profits. It requires a tremendous amount, and this is actually a photo from one of our old mom rooms in San Francisco as well. So the moms are maintained for the genetics, and so we take cuttings off the moms to get clones. So majority of cannabis production is clonal at this point. We do see a lot of people doing seed production that's primarily in outdoor production though. But for greenhouse and controlled environment agriculture, almost everything is done clonally. We do see some people doing tissue culture. But it's not as significant as just maintaining the moms at this point. I think people are a little bit afraid of tissue culture in the industry. Don't know why, but. So that handsome devil is me in front of some moms. These plants can get fairly big. We maintain them to be in a vegetative state by basically giving them a break of the darkness at night. So this is a photoperiodic plant. They require long periods of darkness to go into flower. You can keep them in veg pretty much indefinitely by just breaking up that night. And a lot of people will talk about like, oh, my genetics got tired and I had to kill the mom. I mean, God, please don't do things like that. That doesn't make any sense. But this is the type of the type of industry we're in where you talk about genetics getting tired. Dr. Yoder, have you ever heard of anyone talk about genetics getting tired?
Epigenetics comes to my mind, and I was going to ask you that. How uniform is it over generation and generation?
One thing we have seen is that sometimes it depends on where you take the cutting on the plant, and there's and we believe it to be epigenetic, that there's going to be some differential gibberellin sensitivity depending on where you take that cutting. And so sometimes I could take a cutting off the same mom, and I've got some of the clones that are growing this tall, and then some just stay right here. And the internode length is ridiculous. And that's typically not a good thing, just because you like those tight nugs, right? Okay, forgive me for saying that. Very densely packed inflorescences. Got to remember who my audience is. And so if you have significant internode length, it's going to be a looser inflorescence of flowers, and people typically see that as being lower quality. However, I'm here to argue that that is not the case. In fact, you're less likely to have botrytis infection, and the cannabinoid to weight ratio is actually better when you have loose nugs. But here I was filmed for this TV show. Here we are at Dark Heart Nursery in Oakland. These are in the background. You can see some moms. You can see some of the baby moms in the foreground there. Here I am talking to Dan Grace, who's the owner. And you can see those clones in the foreground. So these are what the cuttings look like. So, you guys know about this. We take a vegetative cutting, dip it in some indole acid, and away the root initiation goes. And so typically we will see roots start initiating within a handful of days. These plants are probably, or these clones were probably cut at this point in time about 5 days before this. But these historically have been sold through dispensaries, and this is for patients to come and grow their own plants. And so they can actually buy these genetics at a dispensary, go home and grow it themselves. More and more, what Dark Heart Nursery is doing is going more B2B and selling to big growers. In fact, so Dan, I've known Dan for a long time. He's a fantastic individual, and we actually might be doing a little bit of a collaboration pretty soon. I'm very excited about. So once you get those clones, you want to veg them out a bit. Now, this is historically how it's been done. You veg them out. That doesn't mean that's how you have to do it. In fact, I won't talk about it too much, but I don't think it's actually necessary to veg these plants. This is, you veg out the plant a little bit, so you break up at night, you let the plant build a bigger infrastructure so they have larger yields per plant. This is a cultivar called True OG. And does anyone know where the term OG actually came from, or at least the mythological etymology of it? Ocean grown. Very good. Yeah, it's not original gangster or anything like that. It's ocean grown. And so what happened? This is actually OG. It's OG Kush, named after the Kush Mountains, where some of the species of cannabis originated from naturally. So this was a cultivar that was developed and bred in I believe it was Manhattan Beach. It was in Southern California in a beach environment. And this was back in the late 80s. And the grower just called it Kush. And when he was going to sell it one day, the guy who was buying it was like, wow, this is a really good product. And basically thinking, you're growing this illegally, you must be doing this up in the mountains, up in Emerald Triangle, because it's really good quality. He said, man, this is some good mountain-grown Kush. And he's like, mountain-grown? F that. This is ocean-grown Kush. So that's where that term comes from. So you're going to go away with a lot of mythology about cannabis, too. So the term chronic that Snoop Dogg popularized actually comes from him being high and misunderstanding the word hydroponic. He thought someone else called it hydrochronic. And that's why that term chronic actually came from Snoop being high. All right, so here we are in a greenhouse. These plants are still in veg. They're just about to be flipped for flower. As you can see in the very top, you've got the blackout cloths, right? So the blackout cloths are necessary in a greenhouse environment to make sure we have that 12-hour of darkness that the plants need to flower. This is what it looks like. This is a fairly large operation. This is not mine, this one. It's actually down in Santa Barbara area. We do buy some product from them every once in a while, but they have a very good product, and it's typically, you don't see grows like this very often in California. It's typically a lot of small grows.
Is there a transition from the production of potted plants and cut flowers into cannabis production? Are many of the coastal greenhouses switching?
Yes, absolutely. And so, the question is, are there a lot of greenhouses that are switching from potted production for, let's say, poinsettia or whatever, into cannabis production? 100% correct. So California used to be a big cut flower producer. And that back in the late 70s, early 80s, Ecuador started producing a tremendous amount of rose production, and they were able to overcome the shipping costs because that's when the big container shipping became a little bit more feasible on an economic standpoint. And so they started flooding the California market with roses. And so a lot of the rose producers that were around back then, actually the only ones that really survived were the ones that came to UC Davis and said, we need help. And they had significant margins, but that went away when it was being flooded. The market was being flooded by Ecuadorian rose growers. And so a lot of those greenhouses are no longer, occupied. And Monterey County, for example, where Salinas is, basically said, we're going to give 100 cultivation licenses to take over these, 100 deprecated greenhouses, and just basically make it an economic boost for the county. And so we definitely are seeing that more and more. But a lot of people, there are a lot of hurdles that get licensed, so it's not as fast as a lot of people are thinking. Pre-legalization in California, there's an estimated 85 to 95,000 growers in the state of California. And if you look to see how many licenses have been applied for, it's about 2,000. So yeah, it's not that many, which is good for me because wholesale pricing is going to go up. This is what the plants kind of look like at the middle stages of flower, not quite ready for harvest, but you can see these female flowers, the inflorescences, starting to develop. The trichomes on the flowers are where the cannabinoids are found, and so one of the things I always like to tell people when we're growing cannabis is these are little factories that are producing cannabinoids and terpenes. These are not our babies, not our daughters. A lot of people like to coddle them, and I said that's not what you want to do. You kind of want to give them tough love. They actually grow better with tough love. We were just talking about that. A little minor stress actually promotes some of the biosignal pathways that end up resulting in THC production. And you can see those trellises underneath now. It's now grown through, and so the plants will kind of rest on that trellis a little bit. Sometimes people will interweave the stems in between that trellis. That's called a screen of green. And we see the same thing in rose industry. That's bending. That's what they call it in the rose industry.
How old are these plants?
These plants are probably 3 weeks away from harvest. Typically it's a 2-month process, or probably 4 to 5 weeks. Now, you had said the term cola before. This is a cola, which is just another term for an inflorescence of flowers. This is the female flower. This is actually a photo I took at that Covelo farm. The term cola is just a Spanish term for cattail. So that's where that term comes from. And so if you've ever heard the song Hotel California by the Eagles, the strong smell of colitas, that's in reference to cannabis, so little cattails. They're like basically little buds. So that's where that term comes from. So once again, this is more just than the science of cannabis. It's more the history and etymology of a lot of the terms. And after this, you're going to be as cool as I am, knowing all these weird things, right? Here's a close-up of that female flower right around harvest. This is a cultivar called Surf's Up. It's one of my personal favorites. It has a tremendous nose on it. However, it does have a little slight problem at 2 weeks into flower. It likes to hermaphrodite, which is a bad thing in the cannabis world. You do not want hermaphroditing female plants, and the reason why that is because when you have a pollination event occur, the cannabinoid production halts. And so once again, these are factories. These are they're cannabinoid and terpene factories. If we're doing anything that halts production, that's a bad thing. So pollination is a bad thing in the industry, but also historically, people did not like pollination because it led to seed production. And so if you're buying a bag of weed and there's some seeds in it, those seeds don't have any THC, so you're buying biomass that doesn't have anything that will get you high. Here's a little close-up macro of what those trichomes look like. These are not quite ready to harvest yet. You can see that they're clear. When THC starts loading into those trichomes, it starts kind of giving this milky color to it. And as they progress in their aging, they become a little bit amber in color. Most cannabinoids are kind of crystalline, white in color, but they'll turn amber when they start degrading into some of the other cannabinoids like CBN. And so not all the trichomes mature at the same rate. And so you try to basically try to maximize how much THC you're going to be producing. This is for most growers. This is what they want to do. But after you harvest, you have to dry. So cannabis is actually dried and cured very similarly to garlic. This is some photos of what it looks like when it's drying. There are other ways to dry. This is just called hang drying. I'm going to zoom through for a couple of these because I want to kind of get to the science side of things too. You have to cure it as well. So in these buckets, this is just some of the photos. Typically see buckets and tubs. I actually just recently wrote a blog post for Dark Heart Nursery on curing, drying and curing, and I titled it Dry and Cure, Friday We're in Tubs instead of Friday We're in Love, by The Cure. Come on, that's a good song, right? I thought that was kind of cute. But anyway, yeah, typically curing process does happen in tubs, and part of the reason why that is in the breakdown of things like chlorophyll, the components that it breaks down into are what give that harshness to the smoke. So if you're smoking something, you're coughing up quite a bit, it wasn't cured very properly. You want to cure it in roughly 60 degrees, 55% relative humidity, and give it some time for the bacteria. You want aerobic bacteria to actually break down a lot of those sugars that the secondary metabolites break down into or will degrade into. Once again, this is my production manager, or one of them. He's getting a sniff into this turkey bag full of cannabis. So turkey bags are what historically people used to store cannabis. So a turkey bag is literally what you think it is, like that Reynolds, bag for cooking your turkey. The Reynolds company did not realize why turkey bags were so popular in Emerald Triangle year-round until they caught on in like the mid-90s. And if you go up to like Ukiah and go into like your local Safeway, get end caps of turkey bags, just like get your turkey bags here type of thing. So this is kind of what it looks like. It needs to be trimmed a little bit more, and you just have to trim off some of these leaves. You want these, the main flowers, you trim off those leaves and you get something that looks more like this. This is the final product, basically. All right, let's talk about technology. I'm going to basically talk about three main things. Yeah.
Question. Can you trim them before you cure them, like right after harvest?
Yeah, you absolutely can. You can do a wet trim. I typically avoid that just because it gets really gummy. Your trimming shears will get gummed up real quick. It doesn't mean that doesn't happen with a dry trim, but it's less likely to happen. One thing that's good about a wet trim is the trichomes are less brittle, and so they're less likely to fall off. It's like that's what we want is those trichomes. And so, by the way, trichomes, when they fall off and they find that form that powder, that's just called a keef, right? So
There's a lot of different ideas in post-harvest. There's these like automatic trimming machines.
Yeah.
Do you cure in stainless? Do you use the Boveda
Yeah.
wax to mean what is there a right way, or is it depend on the cultivar?
You know what we need to answer that? Science. There's a lot. This is, when I first got into this industry, I was about 6 months into my job as production director at Spark, and received a phone call from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Will Healy. He's a former director of research at Ball Horticulture. Ball Horticulture is the 800-pound gorilla in the room when it comes to ornamental seed production. And I've known him for a long time, and he was actually calling me to recruit me to take over his position. He's like, I'm going to be retiring in 2 years. I want you to come in, and we'll work together, and you can hit the ground running when I retire. Amazing job opportunity, However, I said, well, let me tell you about what I'm getting myself involved with. And, we started talking about cannabis. About an hour-long conversation goes by, and he says at the end of it, Robbie, you would be an idiot to take my job. And part of the reason why is because it is absolutely virgin territory when it comes to cannabis cultivation research. There's only one university in the United States that can do it, and that's Ole Miss, and they have very little interest in really pursuing the science of it. I know that UC Davis has actually applied with the DEA to do that research. I had the sincere honor to be asked by the Dean of Ag Sciences here on campus, Dr. Helene Dillard, to speak to our advisory council. Coincidentally, this happened on April 20th. And so here I am talking to old dairy cattlemen and rice farmers why 420 is of any significance in the cannabis industry. It's basically like Christmas. But yeah, it's virgin territory when it comes to research, and that's some of the things I'm very interested in pursuing. Honestly, if you guys are still trying to figure out your projects, you want to do some cooperative extension research, there might be an opportunity. John, you okay with that? You doing some cannabis research?
We're not allowed to, right? We are not allowed to do federal, we're aiding, abetting a federal crime if we do that.
So right now,
We're getting close to that right now.
yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
So UC Regents has said that we can do cannabis research. It has to be off-site, and it has to be for the benefit of the people of California, not to the benefit of the farmers. However, luckily, oftentimes when it benefits the people, it also benefits the farmer, especially for crop ecology and optimization research, which is primarily what I'm interested in. I gave part of this talk at the Cannabis Science Conference up in Portland, and I just want to talk about three main things. And this is aeroponics is the first thing we'll talk about, and the reason why I'm interested in aeroponic production is because the water use and nutrient use efficiency skyrocket. Secondly, a lot of pests for cannabis are soil-borne. A lot of the larval and pupal stages for the pests in cannabis are in the soil. So if you're completely removing the soil, you're removing a stage of life for a lot of these pests, and so your need for pesticides actually decreases because of that. So some of the things that we see, this is directly from this company Essence that you saw their product on the earlier slide. The idea for that company actually originated at UC Davis in 2001 in environmental horticulture on the other side of campus in a lab meeting that myself, Dr. Neil Mattson, Dr. Lauren Oakey, and Dr. Heiner Leith kind of came up with this concept, and this company ran with it, and they have these little aeroponic units that they use, and this is what they're saying is their benchmark studies, and of course I want to get in there and do more research and actually validate these studies, but aeroponics is of significant interest to me because of the nutrient use and water use efficiency. Water use in cannabis is a significant issue, especially in the state of California where water is always an issue. So if you're seeing an increase of water use efficiency by 90%, that's something of interest. That's something I want to talk about. Sustainability in cannabis is offensive at this moment, I think. And it's something that needs to be researched a little bit more. This is kind of a study from them, what you can kind of see. And this actually came from a grow house in Oakland. And these are actual results. These are actuals based off of what they did before and what they're able to do afterwards. So there is some benefit on the yield as well. But these units are expensive, and so that's one of the issues, that having that CapEx up front, capital expenditure up front, is a significant issue. I do want to talk about CO2 injection a little bit. And you're probably like, well, Robbie, CO2 injection's been in the cannabis space for a very long time, especially for warehouse production. This is very true. CO2 injection or carbonation is not new in the industry. However, it is new for outdoor and greenhouse production. And that is of significant interest to me. And part of the reason why people claim that there's a higher price point for indoor production is because you can do things like inject CO2 and increase your yields and increase your potency. I'm telling you right now, I grow greenhouse product that is very much imperceptible from indoor. So, so that means my costs are lower, but I can get higher prices for it. Who here has heard of Le Chatelier's principle? All right, what's Le Chatelier's principle? Can someone shout it out? Yeah, so on the side of chemistry, basically, this is more of a chemistry thing, but it is applied to biological entities as well. So basically, any change in status quo prompts an opposing reaction in the responding system. Okay? Here's photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide and water produces sugar and oxygen. Now, granted, there's a lot that happens in the middle, but if we apply Le Chatelier's principle here, and we increase the amount of CO2 by CO2 injection, we actually will see an increase of photosynthesis and therefore an increase of sugar. As you guys know, sugar is the budget for plants, and THC, that's a 21 carbon molecule. That is expensive for the plant to make. And so the more inputs of CO2, the more output we will see of cannabinoids. Now there's another expensive compound that the plant makes, and that is Anyone know what that is? It's a little bit fumbled up. Yeah, so that's a monomer of cellulose, right? So once again, another expensive compound to make. This is actually the most abundant bioorganic compound on the planet. But it's expensive to plant to make. And this is what makes up all the cell walls, as you guys know. So if I want more yield, I need to have more photosynthesis occurs. So if I increase CO2 on the outside of that plant, you're going to have a larger driving force for CO2 movement across the stomata, and higher photosynthesis. So there's a company called AgGas that I will say, I don't have an affiliation with Essence. I do have an affiliation with AgGas. And part of the reason why I'm so interested in them is I sit on the board of advisors for a venture capital group, and they actually came through the program, and I was like, okay, that is truly unique. Part of what they were able to do is they actually did a study with Dr. Ted Shaw on campus here and also with Fresno State, where they did field tomato carbigation and saw an increase of yield of 127%. That is amazing. And so we did do something similar with cannabis. This is a cold weather project that was harvested last November. They're currently harvesting this year's outdoor product, but they saw an increase of yield in the cold of 35%. So it does have an effect. Now, you might be asking, or you might actually already know, why I said in the cold and why that is significant, because of photorespiration and things along those lines. So I'll get to that right now. I'm just going to zip through this real quick. As we all know, because we're all plant nerds here, right? So Rubisco is one of my favorite enzymes. That and superoxide dismutase, because it sounds awesome. But Rubisco is the most abundant enzyme on the planet. It's what is primarily responsible for CO2 fixing. And if you know that has that name, carboxylase oxygenase, so it does have a dual function, and it can oxygenate the ribose 1,5 bisphosphate. But we're interested in the carboxylase action. However, as it gets warmer, the oxygenase function starts to increase. However, we can counteract that with CO2. So one of the things that's nice about increasing the CO2 concentration on the outside of the plant is it drives more CO2 into the stomata, into the plant, and reduces photorespiration, and also reduces your cooling needs. You can run those plants in a warmer environment if you've got more CO2 around. So you're saving money on that end too. One thing that's also interesting about increasing the CO2 concentrations is your water use efficiency also goes up. And this makes sense, right? You know, the reason why the stomata open up is to get that CO2 in. They're trying to hold on as much water as possible. So if you have a really large driving force of the concentration of CO2 on the outside of the plant, the concentration of the CO2 on the inside of the plant, you're going to get a larger flow rate. You can keep your stomata closed more often than not, and still not have a dip in still not have a dip in, sorry, that's what I was supposed to have up there. I apologize while I was talking. You're not going to have a dip in photosynthesis because of that. We're almost done here. This is actually, you can hear the CO2 injecting in the front of the plant. So this is how it works. These lines are basically around the canopy, and you can lift it up as the canopy grows. What's interesting about this technology is this patented technology where they use abiotic environmental factors to know when to turn on and turn off the CO2 injection. So, you know, if you're growing outdoors, you've got a gust of wind that goes by, and basically all your CO2 goes away. CO2 is heavier than air, so it kind of sits around the canopy. But it'll turn on and off in micro doses of the CO2. The CO2 concentration around these plants is around 800. Okay, around the plants, you know, next to it, it's closer to 400. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about, I know we only have 1 minute, and I apologize. Is more story time than it was science. I apologize, but that's how I am. Is what I call a hybrid greenhouse environment or hybrid indoor. There is a way you can combine kind of everything. That was my CMO, by the way. That was me. I'm very interested in UV, specifically UVB in cannabis production. And part of the reason why that is, we'll get into a little bit. But with hybrid indoor, you can get access to that UV, which you don't see HPS does not produce UV, produces a lot of infrared, but not UV. We see the terpene and cannabinoid profiles to be a little bit more complex in that type of light environment. Once again, this is still controlled environment agriculture. We have a lot of control over what's going on, but one of my favorite things, the sun is free. I mean, that's awesome. And it comes up every morning. It's free, and the light intensity cannot be matched. But one thing of significant interest is UVB wipes out powdery mildew spores. And this is a study that was done at Cornell with cucumbers. Powdery mildew basically has, they're transparent cell walls on the spores, and that UV goes right through and demolishes those plants. So you can see this is a little preliminary study that was done at Cornell on cucumbers. You can see the plants that were infected with PM spores, powdery mildew spores, had a 90% infection rate when they weren't treated with UV. That dropped to 5% when treated with UVB. One thing that's also of interest, and this is part of the paper we'll be discussing in about 10 minutes or so, is UVB actually activates a biosignal pathway that promotes botrytis resistance. I'd like to know more about this, especially in cannabis. So guys, get on that, please. There's a photoreceptor called UVR8, and it also promotes THC production. So one of the progenitors for CBG is olivotolic acid. I believe I'm pronouncing that properly. You have to forgive me. I'm a whole plant physiologist, not a molecular biologist. But one thing we've also seen is if you look at this right here, there's the olivotolic acid. Here's CBGA, which is the progenitor for every single cannabinoid the plant produces. So THCA, the plant actually doesn't produce THC, by the way, it produces THCA. But we can talk about that a little bit later. CBDA, CBCA, and everything else. So UVB actually promotes the production of cannabinoids. You do not see this in indoor production. You typically don't see this in greenhouse production because polycarbonate glazing filters out all the UV. So there's certain ways you can get around this. But anyway, that is all I really have for today. I went over a little bit, so please forgive me. But thank you so much for having me come and talk to you guys. And once again, yeah, awesome. Thank you.